After studying this module, you shall be able to know more about stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, identify the various causes of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, and understand the ways in which stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination can be reduced.
Although the terms stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are used interchangeably, there are clear differences between them. Whereas stereotypes are the cognitive component of attitude towards a social group, prejudice is the affective component, and discrimination the behavioral component. In the study of these concepts, including the target's perspective is very crucial since it offers a more complete understanding of the interpersonal and intergroup aspects of prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. A stereotype is a set of beliefs about members of a group that is held simply on the basis of their membership in that group. Stereotypes function as schemas, the cognitive framework for perceiving and organizing information. Stereotypes working like schemes mean that information consistent with the scheme is more conspicuous to the prejudiced individual or group and is remembered more easily than other information. However, information inconsistent with the stereotype is ignored and readily forgotten. Prejudice involves the negative or positive evaluations or judgments of members of a group that are based primarily on membership in a group and not necessarily on the basis of characteristics of individual members. For instance, prejudice based on race occurs when a person is evaluated mainly on the basis of belonging to a particular race and not because of his or her own specific characteristics or traits. Discrimination, the behavioral manifestation of stereotypes and prejudice, refers to negative or sometimes positive actions towards members of a particular group due to their membership in that group. Discrimination involves behaviors like in-group favoritism, name-calling, verbal abuse, intergroup violence and genocide, etc. There are some common characteristics of stereotypes and discrimination. Both involve depersonalization. Both stereotypes and prejudice involve a depersonalized view of the members of the outgroup. Individuals are viewed only as members of a social category and not as unique individuals. Both are socially shared. Intergroup attitudes are shared within and across social groups, and the content of stereotypes and prejudices becomes embedded in the culture of the society. In most cases, prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination are directed towards members of minority groups. When we think of racism and other forms of bias, we picture one group having negative feelings toward another group. Although this is certainly true, research since the 1970s has found that many group biases are more a function of favoritism towards one's own group than negative feelings toward other groups. One of the most startling aspects of in-group bias is that it is triggered very easily. Tajfel found that groups formed on the basis of almost any distinction are prone to in-group bias. The social learning view suggests that people develop prejudice and stereotypes about members of various groups in the same way as they learn other attitudes and beliefs. One important source of information for children in terms of stereotypes and prejudice is the behavior of parents and peers. The media also plays a very important role in shaping the attitudes and beliefs of people. Hence, many times the media depicts people belonging to certain groups in stereotypical ways. Television and other media often portray minority group members in shallow, stereotyped ways. Such media portrayals further perpetuate society's distasteful and undesirable stereotypes towards certain social groups. The realistic conflict theory argues that prejudice is the outcome of direct competition over valued but limited resources. Research has shown that competition cannot by itself lead to stereotyping and prejudice. Findings suggest that prejudice involving competition is not just a result of the absolute level of resources that people feel they lack, rather, it is the relative deprivation they experience that is crucial. Relative deprivation is the sense that one lacks a desired resource in comparison with another group, which is perceived to have more. The social identity theory suggests that we use group membership as a source of pride and self-worth. Tatchfell hypothesized that in-group biases arise from our need for self-esteem. In order to feel pride, we assume that our group is superior to others. Social categorization plays a very important role in the origin of prejudice. Tatchfell et al. Showed that people could be divided into categories on almost any basis, and this causes differing perceptions and actions towards one's own and outgroup. Social categorization leads to the development of stereotypes. Certainly, social categorization plays an important role in how we perceive others. One fundamental way in which people are categorized is on the basis of their in-group and out-group membership. An in-group is a group to which a person feels he or she belongs, whereas an out-group is a group to which a person feels he or she does not belong. For instance, a white female may perceive that she is part of the in-group of white females, and hence non-white, non-females would be thought of as out-group members. Social categorization results in several biases. Prejudice is also demonstrated when people make biased causal attributions. Causal attributions, the ways in which in-group and out-group members explain each other's behavior, are both a symptom and source of prejudice. People often make uncharitable attributions for the behavior of out-group members. They do this in at least three ways. Just world attributions in an unjust world. In many situations, causal attributions implicitly follow a just world ideology that assumes people get what they deserve and they deserve what they get. Second, the fundamental attribution error. In addition to just world beliefs, people have a more general tendency to attribute behavior to dispositional causes. Even when behaviors are undeniably caused by situational factors, people will sometimes favor dispositional explanations, a misjudgment known as the fundamental attribution error. The ultimate attribution error. Drawing on the fundamental attribution error, Thomas Pettigrew suggested that an ultimate attribution error occurs when in-group members attribute negative out-group behavior to dispositional causes and attribute positive out-group behavior to one or more of the following causes: a fluke or exceptional case, luck or special advantage, high motivation and effort, and situational factors. Prejudice in general often finds expression in much more subtle forms of behavior. Racism is prejudice directed at people because of their race. Sexism is prejudice directed at women or men because of their gender. Some social psychologists suggest that despite the apparent reduction of visible stereotyping of African Americans and other racial minorities, a new kind of racism has taken its place. According to social psychologists Samuel Gartner and Dovidio, overt racism has been replaced by modern racism. Modern racism is a subtle form of prejudice in which people appear on the surface not to harbor prejudice but actually do hold racist attitudes. Modern racism arises because people often hold several competing beliefs and values. They want to see themselves as part of the mainstream of society and as fair, humanitarian, and egalitarian. But at the same time, they may still hold negative views about members of outgroups. In most cases, they keep their prejudice under wraps. But when placed in a situation in which they are given social support for racism, they are willing to express and sometimes act upon their racist biases. Sexism. From the moment of birth, boys and girls are treated quite differently. The difference in the way boys and girls are treated is a result of gender roles, the set of expectations defined by society that indicate what is appropriate behavior for men and women. These expectations are so different that they often lead to bias and stereotyping. Such stereotypes produce sexism, which is negative attitudes and behavior toward people based on their sex. In contrast to old-fashioned sexism, which portrays women as unintelligent and incompetent, modern sexism is characterized by a denial that sex discrimination continues to be a problem. According to social psychologists Alice Eagley and Valerie Stiffen, women are seen as most appropriately filling communal professions, that is, professions associated with relationships like teacher, cashier, librarian, etc. In contrast, men are perceived as best suited for agentic professions, that is, professions that are associated with getting things accomplished like doctor, police officer, construction worker, etc. Traditionally, professions relating to communal concerns are of lower prestige and are lower paying than our agentically oriented professions. Gender stereotypes have certain implications. Glass ceiling is the final barrier that prevents women from reaching top positions at the workplace. Women who are successful in male-dominated professions report more gender discrimination as compared to those in gender stereotypic professions. On the contrary, when men enter female-dominated occupations, they quickly rise to high positions, known as a ride through the glass escalator. Intergroup relations are mostly associated with differential status, power, and resources. Majority groups benefit from this arrangement, and hence their members experience a positive sense of identity and esteem. In contrast, minority groups suffer from this arrangement, and hence their members may carry a stigma that negatively affects their self-concept. Because stigmatized groups know exactly the negative stereotypes that others have of them, they experience stereotype threat. Stigmatized individuals are aware that others may judge and treat them stereotypically. This worry interferes with and impairs their task performance. Due to this, they suffer material and social disadvantage and can find that their aspirations are continuously frustrated relative to other groups. Although some stigmatized individuals are vulnerable to low self-esteem, diminished life satisfaction, and in some cases depression, most members of stigmatized groups are able to weather the assaults and maintain a positive self-image. Many members of stigmatized groups often deny any personal experience of discrimination to maintain a positive self-concept. There are few ways in which the prejudice and discrimination held by people can be reduced, if not removed. First is empathy training. Research on empathy and role-playing suggests that a reversal in perspective can reduce prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. Second is intergroup contact. One of the most heavily studied techniques for prejudice reduction is intergroup contact. In The Nature of Prejudice, Gordon Allport hypothesized that prejudice may be reduced by equal status contact between majority and minority groups in the pursuit of common goals. The effect is greatly enhanced if this contact is sanctioned by institutional supports, that is, by law, custom, or local atmosphere, and leads to the perception of common interests between members of the two groups. This contention, known as the contact hypothesis, states that contact between hostile groups will reduce prejudice only under certain circumstances. Contact between people who have relatively equal status, who have close intimate contact, and who cooperate with or are dependent on one another. Third is using the jigsaw technique. The jigsaw technique is a classroom procedure for increasing intergroup interaction. Like a jigsaw puzzle is constructed by taking small pieces and placing them together, students participating in the jigsaw technique are given a small amount of information and then required to teach the material to a set of partners in a group. When the information from all the students is put together, it forms a meaningful whole. Next are implications of social categorization for reducing bias. Three categorization-based solutions for reducing bias are recategorization and mutual differentiation. The decategorization perspective proposes that if the members of the two groups conceive of themselves as separate individuals or have personalized interactions with members of the other group, out-group stereotypes and intergroup bias can be reduced. Decategorization can include friendly interactions in which people relate to one another in terms of their personal interests rather than interests relevant to their respective groups. Also, there are self-other comparisons that replace group-on-group comparisons as well as self-revealing interactions. In contrast to decategorization, recategorization is designed not to eliminate categorization but rather to structure a definition of group categorization at a higher level of category inclusiveness in ways that reduce intergroup bias and conflict. Recategorization may also involve use of pronouns such as us, we, our, which include the memberships of both groups. Arrangement of the memberships in space, like making an arrangement which reduces the salience of separate group boundaries. Mutual intergroup differentiation includes maintenance of original boundaries, appreciating the differences between the groups, and seeking solutions for collective problems which take into consideration the group boundaries. Next is making humanitarian values more conspicuous. This is a more direct approach in which efforts are made to make salient values regarding equality and fair treatment. According to the theory of cognitive dissonance, people try to avoid or reduce feelings of dissonance whenever possible. Many researchers have used dissonance-related techniques to reduce anti-gay, anti-Asian and anti-black prejudice. To summarize, a stereotype is a set of beliefs and expectations about members of a group that is held simply on the basis of their membership in that group. Prejudice refers to the negative or positive evaluations or judgments of members of a group that are based primarily on membership in that group and not on the particular characteristics of individual members. Discrimination, the behavioral manifestation of stereotypes and prejudice, refers to a negative or sometimes positive actions towards members of a particular group due to their membership in that group. In most cases, prejudice and discrimination are directed towards members of minority groups. The origins of prejudice can be explained by the social learning view, realistic conflict theory, relative deprivation, and the social identity theory. Social categorization lies at the heart of stereotypes, and it leads to many biases like in-group favoritism, including assumed similarity, group serving biases, and out-group homogeneity bias, accentuation, illusory correlation effect, ethnocentrism, and the ultimate attribution error. The biases could be implicit or explicit. Stereotypes can also sometimes become self-perpetuating. Prejudices can be manifested in terms of causal attributions which people make. Racism is prejudice directed at people because of their race. Modern racism is a subtle form of prejudice in which people appear on the surface not to harbor prejudice but actually do hold racist attitudes. Sexism refers to the negative attitudes and behavior toward people based on their sex. Since stigmatized groups know exactly the negative stereotypes that others have of them, they experience stereotype threat. Prejudice and discrimination can be reduced by empathy training, intergroup contact, jigsaw technique, decategorization, recategorization, and mutual intergroup differentiation, and by making humanitarian values more conspicuous.
Due to increased immigration, emigration, and social mobility, there is now a wide diversity in many societies. Although the terms stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are used interchangeably, there are clear differences between them. Whereas stereotypes are the cognitive component of attitude towards a social group, prejudice is the affective component and discrimination is the behavioral component. The target's perspective is very crucial to understand prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. A stereotype is a set of beliefs and expectations about members of a group held on the basis of membership in the group. Prejudice involves the negative or positive evaluations or judgments of members of a group that are based primarily on membership in a group and not necessarily on the basis of characteristics of individual members. Stereotypes may increase the chance of occurrences of discrimination, which refers to the behavioral manifestation of stereotypes and prejudice, indicative of negative or sometimes positive actions towards members of a particular group due to their membership in a particular group. Social categorization may be a necessary but not sufficient condition for intergroup discrimination. There are some common characteristics of stereotypes and discrimination, like depersonalization and being socially shared. But the two terms prejudice and discrimination are two distinct concepts. Prejudice involves an affective or emotional response to a particular group of people, whereas discrimination is one of the behavioral aspects of intergroup relations. In most cases, prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination are directed towards members of minority groups. The social learning view suggests that people develop prejudice and stereotypes about members of various groups in the same way as they learn other attitudes and beliefs. One important source of information is the behavior and teaching of parents, other adults, and peers. Another way is through direct reinforcement and observing the reinforcement of others. The media also plays a very important role in shaping the attitudes and beliefs of people. Realistic conflict theory argues that prejudice is the outcome of direct competition over valued but limited resources. Sheriff et al. Conducted an experiment to see how prejudice develops between groups called the Robbers Cave experiment. Competition cannot by itself lead to stereotyping and prejudice. Rather, it is the relative deprivation they experience that is crucial. The social identity theory suggests that we use group membership as a source of pride and self worth. Tatchfeld hypothesized that in group biases arise from our need for self esteem. As a result, our quest for a positive social identity leads us to inflate the positive aspects of the group to which we belong and belittle groups to which we do not belong. However, when we perceive a threat to our group, we respond by being derogatory to the source of the threat. Social categorization also plays a very important role in the origin of prejudice. The diagram shows the various theories regarding the origin of prejudice. Stereotypes are defined by the beliefs shared by members of one group about the shared characteristics of another group. They are shaped by the socio-historical and normative environment in which they prevail and often act as schemas. According to the cognitive approach to prejudice, social categorization processes lie at the heart of prejudice. They lead to the development of stereotypes and play an important role in how we perceive others. The relationship between prejudice and categorical thinking was first systematically explored by Gordon Allport. Categorical thinking has a tendency to distort perceptions like assimilation and contrast. One of the outcomes of social categorization is in group favoritism effect. The in group out group bias operates like the self serving bias. Categorization leads to a perceptual distortion in which members of the in group appear more similar to one another and more different from members of the out groups than if they had not been categorized. The various systematic biases arising due to in group favoritism are group serving biases, assumed similarity effect, and out group homogeneity effect. Other effects of categorization are automatic schema activation, accentuation, illusory correlation effects, and ethnocentrism. People holding stereotypes are prone to the ultimate attribution error. This means that when people who hold strong stereotypes view negative behavior of minority group members, they attribute it to their dispositional characteristics. But positive behavior is attributed to situational factors. Four kinds of responses that may occur as a result of ultimate attribution error are the exceptional case, special advantage or luck, the situational context, and extraordinary motivation and effort. In addition to the explicit stereotypes, people also harbor implicit biases outside of their conscious awareness. Some researchers have shown that these biases can be reduced. Several studies have observed in group biases by the age 3 or 4 and the development of racial and gender stereotyping soon after. Once the stereotypes are learned, they sometimes take on a life of their own and become self perpetuating stereotypes. Prejudice is also demonstrated when people make biased causal attributions. Causal attributions are the ways in which in group and out group members explain each other's behavior as both a symptom and source of prejudice. The various causal attributions are just world attributions in an unjust world, the fundamental attribution error, and the ultimate attribution error. There are two forms of discrimination: racism and sexism. Racism is prejudice directed at people because of their race. According to Gartner and Ovidio, overt racism has been replaced by modern racism, which is a subtle form of prejudice in which people appear on the surface not to harbor prejudice but actually do hold racist attitudes. Sexism is negative attitudes and behavior toward people based on their sex. The difference in the way boys and girls are treated is a result of gender roles. These expectations involved often lead to bias and stereotyping. Such stereotypes produce sexism. A classic study by Broverman et al. Identified several traditional stereotypes for males and females. Modern sexism is characterized by a denial that sex discrimination continues to be a problem. Women are seen as most appropriately filling communal professions as against men who are viewed as best suited for agentic professions. Gender stereotypes have certain implications like the glass ceiling effect, which is the final barrier that prevents women from reaching top positions in the workplace. However, when men enter female dominated occupations, they quickly rise to high positions known as a ride through the glass escalator. Intergroup relations are mostly associated with differential status, power, and resources. Majority groups benefit from this arrangement, whereas minority groups suffer from it. Since stigmatized groups know exactly the negative stereotypes that others have of them, they experience stereotype threat that interferes with and impairs their task performance. Stigmatized individuals are vulnerable to low self esteem, diminished life satisfaction, and in some cases, depression. The diagram depicts the various ways of reducing prejudice and discrimination, like decategorization, recategorization, jigsaw technique, intergroup contact, empathy training, etc. In this module, we have learned that stereotype is a set of beliefs and expectations about members of a group held on the basis of membership in the group. Prejudice refers to the negative or positive evaluations of members of a group that are based primarily on membership in that group. Discrimination refers to negative or sometimes positive actions toward members of a particular group due to their membership in a particular group. The origins of prejudice can be explained by the social learning view, realistic conflict theory, relative deprivation, and social identity theory. Stereotype threat is experienced by the stigmatized group when they have knowledge of the negative stereotypes people have towards them. Prejudice and discrimination can be reduced by empathy training, intergroup contact, jigsaw technique, decategorization, recategorization, etc.